While the West debates, China builds. In this episode of Mindblowers, we dive into how China is racing ahead, faster, bolder, and often unnoticed by Europe and the US. We'll talk flying cars, robot love, super babies, and other mind-blowing shifts reshaping the future.
I was really blown away.
Europe is like a non-entity in these discussions for them.
We're at least 10 years behind. Exploding my mind, he said he had a conversation, I don't even know if I should share it. To sign all these papers saying it's okay if I die.
Hi, and welcome to Mindblowers. Today we have Liselotte Lyngsø and Lars Tvede in the studio, and we're going to talk about China because both Liselotte and Lars have been to China several times. And I think my first question will be to you, Liselotte. So does it feel like you're stepping into the future when you travel to China?
I was really blown away because I've been traveling to Japan as well. I'm sitting in the Ministry of Transport looking into the future of public mobility. So I ventured to Japan because 60% they love public transport in Japan. In Denmark, it's only 8%. So I was very impressed with that. And then I go to China and I experience the bullet trains and the logistics around it. And I was really blown away. But even just arriving in Shanghai, experiencing the silence of the city because everything is electrified. Basically, you can buy any car you like, but you can only get a green number plate if you live in the city. So everybody drives electrical. And I had no idea that it improved quality of life in the city like that. I knew, of course, it was good for our health, anti-pollution, but the quality of being able to communicate when you walk on the side road, putting people in the center, that was amazing. So yeah, sure. I think it's China's speed, which is really taking me aback. The speed of development as well. I think they say that in 1 year in China is more or less 4 years in Europe.
So, for the people who don't know, Liselotte is a futurist. So, if you should kind of say how far in the future is China compared to, for example, Denmark or London, what would you say?
Well, Denmark is one of the most digitized European countries that we have. The problem is that we're not looking at the data together. So we're not having the big real-time data. And that's really the game changer. So as long as we don't do that, we'll be way behind. But I think it's more or less click of a button to catch up if we really wanted to in terms of healthcare, in terms of transport, creating a smart country. But I think as long as we won't do that, and there's a lot of regulation hindering that, we're at least 10 years behind. But we will be pushed because, of course, as people realize that things can look otherwise, and as we have the environmental crisis that forces us to find new solutions, we have to look also at countries like China, even though we don't necessarily like their way of running a country. But as a futurist, I really always try to stay neutral, saying interesting, exciting, not whether their way of running the country is good or bad, but really being curious about it, of course, to see what sort of insights can I bring back. But the sharing of data, not just public consumer data as we see with Google and Apple, but health data, enterprising sharing data, I think that is really amazing. I went together with the China experience, Christine Botrup and Peter Lisbugt, who's been living there for 20 years. And Christina has been reporting back to the news as a reporter. And they had the advantage of getting us inside the headquarters. So we went to the headquarters of Huawei. We went to the headquarters of ByteDance. We went to some robot companies, some battery companies, NIO. And for instance, a pension company called Ping An. And I think there I really had an eye-opener because they said, oh, don't talk about us as a pension insurance company. You know, for us, it's just about harvesting all the data we can get. So now we are venturing into cars, to supermarkets, to amusement parks, because Daniel, we just want to know all about you. Who are you? And the more nuances we get, the better service we can provide, and the more power it is. And already now in this company, 85% of all customer service is with chatbots. So it's only when you get really, really angry that you end up talking to a real person.
So you've both been posting on social media when you are in China. And I remember you, Lars, there were a couple of robots. I think you, Lise-Lotte, you showed like people running marathons together with their robots.
Yeah, I went to the first marathon in Beijing to watch this competition between people and robots, and they had divided the road into two. And it's basically, I think, a great way also of depicting the mindset of innovation in China, because they have said we want to be first runners in humanoid robots. You can say they can now tick off the electrifying the cars. So now they had moved on to the next goal, which is these humanoid robots. They have, as in Europe, a lot of elderly. So I saw one at Ubitech, a robot which is only 40 kilos, and you can push it all you like, and it's looking like a small person, but you can't get it to tip over. It has such a great balances, even though it's standing on two legs. And I think they were the one winning the marathon. And I'll send you afterwards a little film, Daniel, where I show you my looking at these robots, because it was so fantastic. Because one thing is talking about it, another thing is really experiencing it. When I went to Shenzhen, I used the Pony app. I don't know why it's called Pony, but it's getting you the driverless car, and it picked me and two friends up at our hotel, and it drew us for half an hour in traffic. It was 4:00 in the 5:00 in the afternoon. Lots of traffic, lots of bicycles, lots of pedestrians, and no problem whatsoever. So we're sitting on the screen. I'll send you the movie, picking out the music we wanted in the cabin. If you decide you don't want to go, you can just get it to pull in. So you're talking to this little robot in the car, and for some reason the steering wheel is still there, and it looks like a ghost driving. I don't know about the pedals, but again, of course, I've been looking into a lot of this also with Waymo in California, but it's really different to experiment with it in real life. The other driverless experience I had was the driverless flying car, which they believe is going to be a huge game changer, because then you can really avoid congestion. So it's like a little drone. You can be the next type is for 4 people. This one was only for 1 person. You could only be 83 kilos, including luggage. So I was traveling with a lot of top CEOs from the windmill company in Germany, and they were so angry because all of them were more than 83 kilos. So you had to stay below that, but then you can fly up. And at the moment, there are still a lot of people on ground. The battery went flat within half an hour, and they needed to exchange it. So we are still in the early days there, but it's really an area where they expect a lot of things also with this electrifying. And it works. It works really well, and you can basically, you're not so high, so you have the flights, and you're not so low that you have all the congestion. So that is quite amazing. They're called Ehang, really interesting company to look into. And I think already now in May, they wanted to sell commercial tickets. At least there was a vending machine there. So that's definitely worth a visit. Saying that, I had to sign all these papers saying it's okay if I die, because I think there will be no insurance covering in case it goes wrong. So that was really interesting. But then, as a futurist, I try always to look for disruptions and trends. And when I came back, I was speaking to Novo Nordisk, and they have these projections that there will be a lot of obesity in China. It's 1.2 billion, and they are expecting this huge market. And anyway, I was standing in the metro, and in the metros, they always have these warnings telling people how to behave. So it's not advertisements telling you what to consume, but basically how to be a good citizen. So I was watching these and I realized, oh, you can only have a dog which is less than 35 centimeters tall. And you can only have one dog. So basically, within a very short time, they I don't know if they exterminated or asked them to move to the country or whatever they did, but all big dogs were gone, and there are only small dogs now, and which is an amazing market. Lars and I have done a podcast on the future of pets that goes for China as well, because they don't get children. So for sure, that this one pet policy is really a very special pet. So they buy strollers and all kinds of stuff. Anyway, I was watching this and thinking, wow, imagine that they can roll out this. And then suddenly it dawned on me, whoa, they're not going to have obesity. And then I started looking into the policy. And right now they are educating all teachers that has anything to do with food to avoid processed food. They removed the candy stores. They have put the alcohol percentage down in the beer to 2%, so you don't put on so much weight. And they basically put on the target for 2030, we won't have obese kids and we won't have obese adults. So if you as a family has this problem, you will be asked to, speak to your local authority about what to do about it, what kinds of interventions. And you think, oh, they won't manage. Yes, they will manage. I mean, they managed with the dogs, so why shouldn't they manage with the people? And it's always interesting to see these insights, because then I come back, I'll talk about them, and I could see they were like, no. At Novo Nordisk, they try to get me to go away because I don't want to hear it, and I'm like, but you have to look into this, because trends are not necessarily carrying on, because you have a society there with some engineers in the top, and they're looking at what are good investments and what are bad investments, and they put them into their sheet of Excel, and then they just try to fix it. It's really a fixing society.
So how did you actually talk to people in China? Like, did they speak English, or were you using translation apps the whole time?
Then I had the great advantage that Google Translate is so fantastic. So I managed to really talk to the local Chinese people about different things. So I'm also at the board at CBH Business, which is now being put together with Kia. So I'm on a big school system there looking into AI. And at the moment, at the Danish school systems, they ask actually the students to write on paper with a pencil, because they're so afraid that they will cheat with AI. So, of course, I was looking very much into that also at UBTech. And they have decided that all teachers in the whole country have to take 6 hours of AI lessons a week in order to train the kids. And they're really transforming the AI training into robotics, coding, ethics of algorithm, putting it into different subjects. So even there, I've come back and my head is exploding with all the stuff we have to try to introduce to the educational system in order just to get there.
So I'm actually curious, how do Chinese people see Europe these days? Like, is it still this dream destination? Do they still want to move here to work and live?
To give you a picture of that, I had dinner with the CEO of L'Oreal in all of Asia, and he said, "Oh, Lisa, I have a big problem because I can't get the Chinese people to be expats in Europe. They just don't want to go, and I promise them all these good working hours, great salary, good schools for their kids, and they just say, no, we don't want to go. We'll go way too much behind in the competition if we go to Europe. In Europe, they all play golf. They are all retired. We don't want to go there." So that was really, they see it as a huge career setback. And he told me that after COVID, I think there were about 300,000 Europeans in China working at different companies. And then during COVID, they were home at Christmas holiday. And then, of course, Chinese people had to take over because the country closed down for 2 years. And the Chinese top managers have done such a good job. They don't want the Europeans back. They work much harder hours. They work, they call it 996, which is from 9 in the morning to 9 in the evening, 6 days a week. So they work like crazy, basically. He said, well, I went to Sciences Po, the best university in Paris, and still I feel like, a really lazy fart compared to these guys. It's crazy. So they have a different morale around this.
So I was just wondering, obviously you were shown all these futuristic things, but if you had just been a tourist and just looked around, I mean, is it a robotic society already?
I mean, the driverless car was from my hotel in an app, and you should just get the apps. You have to have Alipay and you have to have WeChat. So I've sold out of my whole private life, but it's worth it because then you have Didi. You can't just call a taxi by putting your hands out on the street. They don't take cash. So you go on Didi and then you pick which car do you want, and then it picks you up. And you can do premium. Then you have drinks in the car, and it's really fantastic service. And then, of course, the driverless options as well. You can't really go into these shops where you can buy lots of, Timo and things. Also that you buy it on your app, and then it's delivered to you within 15 minutes. And it's done by drones, which have some delivery pickups. And then you have these electric scooters that pick it up from there and deliver it to you. And in my hotel, I really wanted this robot to deliver my goods. And I was waiting, and then this person comes up and knock on my door. And I'm like, why did I have a robot? And they say, no, Lisa, you're staying at the executive suite. That includes a real person delivering the goods. But then I agreed with her that she sent me the robot, and then I got the robot. So I have a nice movie from that as well that I can show you. So I guess the top luxury is still a person-to-person service. At the top-notch customers at the insurance company, at the banking. But the rest of us, we have to deal with robots and chatbots. And as you know, we have the DeepSeek coming from China as well. Everybody uses that in China right now and are thrilled about it. And of course, it's using 1/10 of the electricity compared to the other LLM models. So that is a revolution in itself. So I say the whole public sentiment that I experience is a lot of pride. And it was said in a really harsh way, like, the US is making a trade war with us, but, we existed 5,000 years before the US, and, we'll exist 5,000 years after the US as well, so we don't need the guys. And what I look at as a futurist is very much that it's not enough to envision something. You also have the power of creation. So already in 2019, Trump said, I want to buy Greenland. Well, then we should have started preparing ourselves for what if he's serious about it, and what if he gets back to the office. We completely failed that. All of Europe completely failed to prepare for what is going on right now. But China, they have prepared themselves. So they have created these social media everywhere where they make fun of these sweatshops in the US with the fat Americans sitting collecting Apple phones. And they're like, ha ha ha. And I went to this Neo factory and there were no people. So they're like, why does Trump want to re-industrialize the US? We have moved away from there. We don't have manned factories. So I went to this car factory. Unfortunately, I was not allowed to take pictures from there. But there was one job which was manned. And that was at the very end, you have these cars that have been produced before they get the color on. And then there were these people who had white gloves, and they were like stroking the cars, knocking carefully on the car, because they said there are certain things that the AI can't pick up, which needs this human touch, almost like a doctor that can see what's wrong with you without you telling it, right? They can just, this is bad. So this intuition job was still left, which I thought was really interesting, that you could have a job as a car stroker. What I asked these Chinese people about was, do you think AI is going to make you more stupid and lazy? Because that's what we see. We have a co-pilot study from Microsoft showing that it's like hands off wheel. People are losing the power of concentration. And she said, sure, unless, you build in the muscle power, then you can really get more clever people than ever before. But it's basically, you have to use what the AI can give you as a stepping stone and then move on with your visionary powers from there. And that's why we have to train the workforce. And it's so important. So we're not getting stupefied, but stronger. And they have done that for quite a while. They have limits on how much time you can use on gaming, only 3 hours a week. So they're very focused on how do we improve the intelligence of people and how do we use the new technologies to improve that intelligence. So that's really a game changer, and that's really where I'm worried that we'll move from being 10 years ahead behind to 20 years behind if they suddenly use that as a stepping stone to move even beyond. Also because they have this data sharing. Then I asked, how have you succeeded so well in, for instance, creating these cars where you can charge batteries within 5 minutes? So it's equivalent of having a petrol car. I'll show you that movie as well. You can call for a battery, a self-driving battery. So if you can't find a charger for your car, it will come to you. So how have you managed all this? And then they said, well, we pick our battles. So these are the, for instance, electric driverless cars or whatever. And then we enable all the people who want to start in that competition. They basically go, I don't know if you watch Squid Game. That's a horrific series, but it's a little bit the same. They compete. They really put them into a competition. So they don't tell them how to obtain this goal. They can come to it any way they like. I think in Squid Game, they are licking these honey cookies or whatever, and there are different techniques in order not to break it, in which case you die. But that is more or less the same muscle power they're using. And of course, I have a lot of people being really highly educated, and they had their one-child policy. So the most important thing for a parent is that your kid is doing well in academic terms. And sometimes it goes overboard. Again, the guy from L'Oreal told me that one of his younger employees, his mother insisted on feeding him until he was 16 so he could use all his brain power on intellectual work and not have to worry about eating. And that's maybe going a little over the top, I think. So, but it's a machinery that runs really well, and I've never seen so many cameras in my life. And it's so convenient. They know who you are, so you pay with your palm. That has actually been withdrawn in certain shops because people are suspicious that they don't like palm reading for some reason, so they rather pay with their face. But as soon as you have that, you forget about bringing your phone. You can just go with your body basically and get around. And I think that's really cool as well.
You mentioned they're not having kids anymore. Can you talk a little bit about kind of their relationships to each other, maybe kind of AI love and companion love, maybe even robot love?
Well, they are basically very positive towards robot love, and there's a new sex robot coming out in August based on artificial intelligence, which should give a better service than before. The women are basically not that interested in it, so they had the problem that they're not coupling up, so they are decoupling. That's a big trend. And the decoupling trend means that basically on if you are single, you're put on a dating app, whether you like it or not. But also at the People's Square on Sundays, parents go with their CVs for the kids, and they basically try to find out. So let's say I meet with Lars, and I said, I have a very nice son, Saya. I think he's fantastic for your entrepreneurial daughter. She still hasn't had children, has she? And they're really nice. And then we agree that the match would be good. And then they basically say, oh, okay, if you promise to take care of the kids, we might consider it, So the kids are then sent back to the grandparents. But it's a huge problem because they had their one-child policy, and now the Chinese are just like, no, I'm not going to go that way. But in Mongolia, I spoke to Diana Wu, a futurist living in Hong Kong. She was really sweet. She came and visited me in Shenzhen. She said they're really forcing in having more kids because they're afraid of the Russians on one side and the Chinese on the other side. So there they are telling all the women, you need to have at least 3 children. And they're like, oh, but we want to have our career. And then they have decided, a lot of these women, to have triplings. So they basically get 3 fertilized eggs in the womb at once. So they have triplets, and they're then sending them back to their grandparents, and then they can tick it off. So that's highly efficient. And I think that also shows some of the drawbacks of these kinds of totalitarian societies. You should be careful for what you ask for because you actually get it. But do you get it in the form and the format that you really want to? That is the big question. And then I think the whole birth situation, I wouldn't say that China is not going to think about making super babies. I know this guy, he did it some years back and he went to jail, and we have international agreements that we don't want to make super babies. But if they're not created in the traditional way anyway, you might as well enhance their EQ with 20%, like those twins that were born by this guy had. Because I guess it's also a competitive tool, if you like. And then I spoke to another Chinese guy, Lim, who was exploding my mind. He said he had a conversation. I don't even know if I should share it. I'll say it, but it's not Chinese policy, at least not yet. But they were discussing, that the elderly that are coming, of course, the whole society building is like very few kids in the bottom and lots of elderly people. And then again, calculating, saying, okay, maybe we should give 1,000 euros to all the pensioners. The pensioning age is 60 in China. We should give them 1,000 euro. But then they have to agree that they die at the age of 85. And of course, they can decide not to do it, but then they will have to pay the money back, right? But then the idea is to get all the spending earlier, so people spend them on their grandchildren, on traveling, on eating, or on partying, instead of spending them the last 3 months. They say this 1,000 euros, not 1,000 euros, it's a 1 million euros. These 1 million euros is what they spent doing the last 3 months of their life. And it's so stupid because they die anyway after these 3 months. So imagine that we could put that to work.
It cannot be 1 million euros.
It's 1 million euros per person at 60.
Are you sure about that? That's a lot of money in China.
Yeah, it's a lot of money spent in healthcare as well on the last year of your life, where the quality of life is really bad anyway. I'm not saying it's a good idea.
I think the number is really big, but whatever.
Trying to think, could we reallocate? Try to ask the Danish healthcare how much we spend on.
I know that roughly half of our healthcare is in our entire life is spent the last few months. I just think 1 million euros in China is a big amount, but never mind. It's the principle that's interesting, yeah. And not to my taste, but interesting.
Money for China.
Yeah. What about the super babies? Can you explain what is a super baby? How do we make a super baby?
Oh, but that is due to the CRISPR technology. So basically, we are getting much better. Also, thanks to AI. If you look at who won the Nobel Prizes last year, it was all these AlphaFold. So precision medication where you can actually go in and you can change certain genes. So in this sense, it was some Chinese babies, and they had HIV. and that was removed. And a side effect was that you became more clever, 20%. So I don't. He is. The doctor said it wasn't on purpose, but I really, I'm not sure.
But there was in one of my two Supertrans books, I cite a study where a scientist, and they went out to in different countries and asked people if they could have if, for instance, they could have a genetic modification, so that if they had a child that had a disease that would make them die very early, if they would like, given the option to have a medical modification, genetic modification. And then there was, in all countries, there was people who would say yes, but mainly in Asia. But then they went on and asked, what if they become more intelligent? And then in the West, they generally say no, but in Asia, they say yes. And then they go on and say more beautiful. And in some of Asia, they say yes. And in the West, they mainly say no. So the mentality is just far more open to these kind of things. They just want the result. And a part of the reason is that probably that they don't have so much religious heritage that we have here. So, for instance, in China, you have some philosophers, but not really religious, religions like Christianity to nearly the same extent as we have in the West. So they just say, yeah, if we can get it better, we want it.
Talking of religion, I went to the Lama Temple in Beijing, and that has become a total magnet of young people. So there are a lot of young Buddhist people. And I think actually, if we look into the challenges that China is going to face, is this whole, what is the meaning of life? The more philosophical questions that once they, right now, 85% of people buying a car is the first time in their life that they buy a car. So we have a huge new middle class emerging. But once they get used to the money, right, and the wealth, they start saying, oh, and then what? And then what? And I think that is really going to challenge the government, like we've seen in Europe and the US and everywhere else. And they have to work on that. And I think they are preparing, because they have to do it via dialogue and with via support. So I think we have a government in China who knows that they also have to work on their popularity.
Yeah, so Buddhism is not really a religion. It's more like a philosophy, in my opinion. Same goes with Taoism. But yeah, there will be a search for meaning. And another thing is that there will also be a pursuit of happiness. So what we can see is that in Asia, you have or especially in China, in South Korea, you have much faster technology development, but they don't score high on happiness. So the ones who scores highest on happiness are the mainly smaller Western democratic liberal countries. So technology, they get 10 out of 10. On other factors, not so much.
But if you ask
another thing I think we should touch upon is that if we look at the EU, they are giving up their goal of being CO2 neutral. And China is moving from having the target of 2050 to already obtaining it in 2045. Even though they are the most coal-producing country in the world, they're still producing coal. But that's because they know that they can't rely on the stability of the grid, and they have it as a backup plan if in case of war, basically, or in case of cyber attack or what have you. They have these coal plants. So they are moving over to... so when I went out there with these windmill guys, and they were shocked, to see how far ahead they are. I know the same goes for the sun cell. And then I went to visit these guys making hydrogen as well. And they are apparently using a completely different technology. I tried to ask DeepSeek about what the difference is, but it's actually I have it here on my phone.
Lotte, did anybody mention natural hydrogen? the hydrogen naturally occurring in the ground that you can pump.
Exactly.
That
Was it. And they said we don't have it in Europe at all.
I think what we're experiencing now, us being Europeans, is that the two great powers in the world, apart from Europe itself, are now run by business people. So in a very, very different style, because the current American administration is completely dominated by venture capitalists and serial entrepreneurs in world class, but they're like gunslinging with, Texas style, super rough, radical. And then, and China is run like a giant Singapore, by people, technocrats who have risen through the Communist Party, and they are all incredibly incompetent.
They said Singapore was falling behind.
Yeah, so
but I don't know.
they're incredibly competent. They're completely different values in some senses than Europe have. But in terms of developing technology, they are very, very efficient, and it's not going to stop. So there was this study that was commissioned by Five Eyes, this defense association, where they asked an Australian strategic policy institute to rate Europe, US, and China on 62 technologies that will dominate in the future. So 62 strategic technologies. And I think we all know what the answer was. But it was that 56 of these 62, China was the world leader. In 4, the US was the world leader. In 2, Europe was world leader together with the US. So there's this saying that you still very often hear, that the Chinese are just copying what we are developing here. But the truth is, yeah, they did, and they still do. But they're also now innovating, and we have to copy. For instance, the way DeepSeek is capable of running an efficient LLM on 10% of the power is something that's now being copied in the US, of course. So,
but Lars, no matter what we do, if we don't share the data, we don't get the insight. If you want to do the next pharma medication, you need this. So basically, right now, they had made a very interesting survey with the doctors, the AI doctors, that the AI doctor is actually better if you give the same task than the real doctor.
Yeah.
Even the doctor combined with the AI doctor is worse than the AI. And that's because the doctor combined with the AI doctor is still convincing the AI that it's wrong. So the AI is actually better on its own.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about sharing of data, because can you be more specific what you mean? Because then I want to take it to GDPR.
Yeah, because what I mean is that right now we have a lot of consumption data that is shared, at least at the platforms like Tencent and Amazon. But the next level is that, and that's what only China can do, is to force businesses to share the data with each other. So you get a real digital twin for the whole shebang. And then you can start really have the Internet of Things, where you can go deep diving into all aspects. Transport businesses, consumption businesses, weather data, the whole thing is combined into, you can say, the spatial web. We spoke about that in our Super Trend podcast with Dan Mapes, you remember? He was talking about every icon getting its own digital footprint, putting that into the equation, seeing new designs and patterns that you won't be able to see otherwise. I think that's really a game changer. And that was what I got from my talk with Ping An, that insurance company, that whoever has access to all this data is going to be the winning part.
Yeah, so in Europe we have GDPR, which prevents this kind of sharing of data. It makes it illegal. And at the same time, in many countries, if you want to withdraw some of your own money from the bank, you have to fill in a form explaining what you want to use the money for. And I just read that in Spain, you actually, if it's more than 3,000 euros, you have to send a pre-notice to the bank that you intend in the future to withdraw those money, and then say what you want to use them from. So that's like a double morale in Europe. And I think one of the solutions to get to the efficiency they have in China is to use federated learning, where you, when you share data, you're actually anonymous. So what you share is information about what you do and what is learned about your habits and so on, without disclosing who you actually are. But right now, Europe has handicapped itself tremendously with this GDPR, which is also incredibly expensive. And also, Europe has some rules about AI, which makes it very difficult for European AI to compete against China and the US. So I think it would be fantastic if Europeans and Americans, but in particular Europeans, knew more about the incredible revolution that's going on over there in technology, and understood the strategic risk of falling behind. And I actually think it is a little bit of an eye-opener right now to see how weak Europe is in the big geopolitical game between China, Russia, United States, and so on. How little power we have because our economy is really weak. Another thing I want to say,
Our economy is not weak. I mean, we have the money. If we want, it's not the money; it's the wealth. It's really you can't say that we are poor, because seriously, we are not. We have all the money we need. It's and I think we have to look at, exactly as you say, on how do we share data. We had Kin AI, remember those guys, looking at how to anonymize data so that Daniel is not suddenly prevented from healthcare because we don't like him, because we can see his genes that he has a bad future or whatever. So anonymizing it, making your own personal data, so you can use it for optimizing your education, for optimizing your dialogue with doctors and managers, but then feeding it into the bigger system. And the Draghi report in Europe, he actually said that companies have to start sharing that data, otherwise Europe is falling behind. So I think there is a realization that it's necessary, especially we want to maintain, it's only at the pharma hub we still have a little advantage. So if we want to maintain that, we really have to get much better at sharing that data. But of course, people are unwilling because it's a prisoner's dilemma, right? So if I share all my Wegovy data with you, how do I make sure that I get the stuff back that I need to move ahead in this competition? And that's why we have to make a conglomerate where we somehow all benefit from moving together, so it's not a zero-sum game.
There's another thing I think
but I don't know how to do it.
There's another thing I think is interesting, because I see lots of people talking about how it's a big threat to China's economy that they have so low birth rates. But I saw a study that looked at nations where the birth rates have declined a lot, and looked at whether they then got strategic labor shortage. And it turns out it simply makes most economies accelerate the automation, so they kind of compensate. And clearly China is at the forefront of using AI and robots. And so I think
they expect that every citizen will have 2 or 3 personal
so this is
robots.
This is another workforce.
To help you.
This is another workforce, and since it can gain a life of its own, where robots make robots and AI write AI, it can actually make the workforce much bigger instead of smaller, because they embark on this journey. So,
but the reason why we can't get that in Europe is because it needs cameras everywhere, it needs sensors everywhere, and we don't want to allow that. So unless we embark on this route where you have cameras everywhere, because the road have to explain to the car, how does it look here, in order for the car to navigate. And the same in your home, you can only have a well-functioning robot if it's allowed to look out and get feedback from its surroundings. So we can't even enter that world. I mean, you can have a vacuum cleaner robot and it will get stuck under your sofa.
Yeah, mine does. Yeah, so another thing is STEM education. So STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math. And for instance, if you compare the China to the US, China has 4.5 times as many STEM educated every year as the US. So that's really difficult to compete with. But if you look at it worldwide, almost half or around half of all STEM educated people in the entire world are from China or are educated now in China. So the drift away from STEM to humanities just means that society, develops less technology. So this is also a consideration, and it doesn't need to be super sophisticated educations. You have something called instrument makers, and I can't recall that I've ever in Europe talked with an instrument maker, but in China there's one behind every corner, because they are the ones who make all these machines in the factories who produce 40% of the material goods in the world. So if you want to have rapid technological progress, you also have to have incentives to move into STEM.
So what do you guys think, looking at the US, China, and Europe, do you think they will just propel faster and faster ahead with super babies and a totally roboticized society compared to us?
I think they are very good at actually being futurist and deciding what sort of future they want to create. So I'm quite sure there are a lot of ethical concerns coming into their judgment and decision making as well. They have a lot of pride. So I think actually the whole trade war coming up now with the US is a setback for them as well. The US is a huge market, and vice versa. In the short term, we're going to have a lot of students returning from the best universities. Lars was talking about these STEM people. They're moving back now to China because they're basically being kicked out. So they are getting a lot of knowledge power back into their country. So that's going to give a push. I think they are accelerating now. They talk about themselves as the central kingdom of the world, and they're really moving into that. That's their own self-impression. I don't think they are at all interested in any kinds of wars. They had their road and belt initiatives. Right now, they are succeeding in, again, talking with Southeast Asia, who's been very hesitant towards China. They are really managing to settle in, and in some instances helping the African different countries jumping the curve. So they're basically building a whole new market, South America. So they are busy, but and they want to win this trade war. I don't know if it's going to change too much the course of their plans in terms of sustainability, in terms of obesity, in terms of all the other things. But I think they are actually very focused on being on that track. And then they're trying to develop a foreign policy image. But I as a European, as a person who loves democracy, even though it's slow and cumbersome, I am worried that democracies will survive if we have superhumans, Daniel, and if we and if we have a data sharing, giving them insights. So it will be like we live in black and white analog society from the past, and they're moving in, having all these nuances and buttons to play in order to improve both the planet, biodiversity, energy. But again, also as a mother of four, I'm actually grateful that they are there, because they are the one finding out how do we create abundance in terms of energy, so we don't have to worry so much about how to leave the planet for the next generation. I mean, if we only had the US way, I don't think we would manage in time necessarily.
So just from in the short term, I think the trade war with the US is not as an enormous problem for China. Their export to the US has been 2.8% of the GDP, and now electronics exports has been extended. So I think there's some economic pain, but compared to the size of the economy, that is not their main challenge. Their main challenge is lack of profitability, you can say. Because what they've done is they have very low consumption in China, so it's 39% of GDP, That's private consumption, and you have 17% of GDP in public consumption. So total consumption is 56%. Does any of you know what it is in the US? No, it's 85. It's around 85. And in Europe, it's somewhere in between. So Europe is actually more balanced. But the US has huge overconsumption, and China has overproduction. And it's a deliberate policy that they're able to maintain. And the way they do it is that they tell the regions, or the regions tell the government that they will have the so-and-so level of growth. The government says, you have to lend money to these 10 key industries that are strategic for the future and for our position in it. And if you have private companies that started up, you have to support them in any way. And the banks are also under the control of the government. So they say to the government, if you have startup companies doing this and this, like electric cars, AI, and so on, you need to fund them. And then they do that. And maybe they start 150 different EV, electric vehicle companies. And then at the end of the competition, like the Squid Game, you can see there are 5 winners. And then most of the rest, they get bought or go bankrupt. And then they keep supporting these 5 champions. The problem with pushing growth so hard is that there's not enough profit. And because of that, when they invest, for instance, an amount in building some infrastructure or a factory, that infrastructure, for instance, high-speed trains or the factory producing robots, does not produce enough profits or any profit at all. And that means that normally in a Western economy, when you put money into a factory, typically the factory makes a profit, and that pays back the debt. But in China, the debt tends to accumulate. So the total debt in the society, when you take the government, the regions, the banks, and the state-owned companies, is about 320% of GDP, I think. So this is very, very high. So if this continues to build up into 2045, 2050, the total interest payments in the society will become completely unsustainable. So they need to have a better balance between supply and demand. And they cannot rely on exporting massively to the entire world, because there will be more pushback, not only from the US, but also from other markets. But then again, that's quite easy to do, to raise the consumption. And if they took local consumption from 39% up to what is typical in the Western economies, that would be something like, if they did it tomorrow, that would be like a 50% increase in consumption per capita. So it's quite a lot. And it's something they are trying to postpone for as long as possible, because they want to invest in technology. But they have to make that transition gradually, at least over the next 1 or 2 decades. But so as I said, the US needs to cut the fiscal deficit and have more money invested in new capacity, new technology. And Europe has an innovation problem, in my opinion. And there are many roots of that innovation problem, high taxation, sometimes inhibiting regulation, quite often actually, but also an attitude. And I think all of us, we do these speeches and seminars and so on, and we have all experienced that when we talk about new technologies in Europe, at least if I can always speak for myself here, but when I say, do you have any questions? Then people say, isn't it dangerous if, shouldn't we be worried about, isn't it scary if, and when you talk in China, it's like, which part do you think will grow fastest, and what is the best part to invest in? So they love it. And in Europe, there's like, let's be careful. What is the damage effect of that? America is also, I think, more like Asia, much more technology positive. And I've been thinking about what the reasons might be. And I think it's something cultural that goes back, and excuse me for this, to around 1780, where you had the beginning of the Sturm und Drang movement, which was an anti-technology, an anti-rationality movement, which transmuted into, or got an overlay of, the Romantic movement, then became, during the evil Nazis, the Sturm und Drang. They had their special variation of that. And then now you have degrowth and so on. So you have a lot of cultural skepticism against innovation, technology, and science in Europe that you don't see at all in China, especially. And that also can make a big difference over time.
Could they get so far ahead that they see the US and Europe as irrelevant?
Yes, I mean, completely. And they're working very hard on making the US irrelevant. And they think it's really fun. So that is exactly what they're doing. And I don't think they want to dismiss Europe, but I just don't think they think of Europe as Europe. I think they think nation-wise. So they think about Germany, France, the UK. So it's only us who have this EU notion.
Well, I've been sitting on panels in China talking about international economics and geopolitics. I have not once experienced anybody mention Europe. They talk about the US a lot, but Elon Musk, Donald Trump. Europe is like a non-entity in these discussions for them.
It's a tourist destination.
Yeah. Handbags.
With a
Wine.
lot of history. And I mean, we might well live off being a great tourist destination.
That's it from Mindblowers for now, but we'll be back with part 2, diving deeper into China's explosive rise and asking, should Europe and the US be worried? Or should they team up? See you next week.